Welcome to another episode of Pedagogy Power in Primary English. It's your host, Carla Williams, author of the Mastery in Reading Comprehension Guide for Primary Teachers and Leaders. Today, we have an exciting guest. His name is Alexander Rosenburg. He is the founder and creative director of LinkyThinks. I don't know if any teacher has ever heard of LinkyThinks, but it's such an excellent resource site for creative writers. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you, Carla.
Nice to see you too. Now, I understand you recently won an award, which is absolutely amazing. You won an award, the Education Resource Award for Best Education Book in 2022, to be specific. Congratulations. What did you win the award for?
Thank you. Well, it was unexpected. We were shortlisted for 4 of our different resources and didn't expect to win any, actually, because we were up against all these heavy hitters from Collins and Bloomsbury, Grammarsaurus and Vocabulary Ninja. We just went along for the ride, but we won the Best Educational Book of 2022 for the Descriptionary Humanoids edition, which I'm sure I'll tell you about in more depth, but it's a tool for describing characters and building stories through character-driven narratives, helping kids to structure stories from the level of the sentence to the paragraph to the story, and they can design their own characters along the way as well.
And it looks like a lot of work went into the creation of that resource. Such beautiful images. I own a copy myself and do highly recommend that, teachers grab one for use in their classroom. If not, grab a whole class set for sure, because they are something spectacular when it comes to vocabulary. And that brings us to the focus of this episode. We're going to be looking at victorious vocabulary. How do we develop creative writers in the primary classroom? And I think you are certainly an expert when it comes to creativity and the use of vocabulary and how teachers can make the best of the national curriculum when it comes to inspiring creative writers. So the first question I have for you, Alex, is how is it that teachers struggle so much when it comes to getting a wide range of vocabulary in? It's really, really tricky, I think, sometimes for us to, really put rich vocabulary into our children so that they use that naturally. But why do you think teachers find it particularly tricky?
I think there's a couple of reasons. In my experience, when I've gone into schools and spoken to teachers, if you ask a room full of teachers, all of whom are involved in teaching creative writing day to day, how many of them in their own day-to-day lives engage in creative writing themselves, almost no hands go up. And it's totally normal. How many of us, when we leave school, write stories unless it's a particular job or hobby of ours? It's one of those areas of education that we let drop off as we move into our adult lives. So teachers themselves, in my experience, often lack confidence. If you can't do something yourself, it's hard to teach it. So a lot of teachers haven't written many stories or haven't used this kind of vocabulary to express themselves in this kind of way for years, or certainly since they were at school. So it's natural that teachers would lack confidence in this area. And I think another reason is because the way that vocabulary is often taught is, I think it sends a message of the fanciest and the biggest words are the best words, and that's just not true. Words are tools. They're useful. They should be useful. All these kids with books full of words and definitions or words and synonyms, it actually has very little impact, in my opinion, on the ability to articulate oneself cleverly, creatively. And you see, these kids just vomiting out thesauruses, using words out of context and focusing on the number of syllables in a word rather than the power of that individual word to express an image or idea.
I totally agree. We do get caught up with certain things like, wow words, word of the week. And it almost feels like we're just chucking the words in there, but not with any real context or purpose. And that can be a little bit of a struggle in terms of balancing range of access to vocabulary, to rich vocabulary, and suitability when it comes to best fit fit vocabulary for whatever it is that we're trying to deliver in a text. So, you know, obviously, though, I must say children do love wow words. They love it. And in your opinion, are there other ways to get children to have an absolute love for vocabulary outside of just the wow word approach?
I think so. I think focusing on the utility of words rather than, I mean, I don't have a problem with wow words and that particular approach, but I think it's just how you collect the words, how you store the words, how you use the words. I think putting words into day-to-day speech translates into writing really well in a way that just jotting them down on paper doesn't, because kids don't speak the way that they're being taught to write. And one thing I like to do is play a game that I call Word Sneak. And it's something that can be done as a kind of discrete session, or it can take place over a week, or it can be taking place all the time. But it's something where the words that have been allocated are, the aim of the game is to slip them into natural conversation seamlessly, which is actually a really good test of whether you've used the word accurately or not, and a really good test of whether kids can recognize the word in context or not. And like I say, there's loads of different ways you can do this. You can cut these words up and put them in a hat and pick them out and get people to listen in and write down the words they think have been selected. You can throw in some red herrings to confuse people. And the thing about that is that even when it goes wrong, it's a really good learning experience, because it's funny when a word is crowbarred into conversation in a kind of clunky way. But like I say, you can do it as a game. You sit down, you play it for 20 minutes. You could do it as a whole class. You can do it, you know, the words are set for the week and people have to do it just in day-to-day interactions, and people get scores and marks and prizes. I won't go into too much detail, but it's a really versatile game. That's one way of doing things. And I think also enacting words, allocating them to visuals, allocating them to real life things as opposed to just the abstract. So one thing I'll do, I'm just going to use one of my tools as an example, word wheel book. You've got, for example, if you turn to a page like the verbs page, in the center you've got basic verbs like ran, walked, said, and saw. Expanding out, you've got all these other options, all these synonyms, but really there's kind of no such thing as an exact synonym, because you use all these words differently in different contexts. So we might in a class get kids to stand up and enact marching as opposed to staggering, as opposed to swaggering, as opposed to hobbling or limping or whatever. And we would talk about what this might tell you about that person and why they are behaving this way. And so it becomes a kind of drama session as well as anything else. You might use, I don't know, the colors wheel, looking at all the different shades. And it's, you know, kids get into the habit. They learn the word sapphire and then everything blue is sapphire. They learn the word emerald and then everything green is emerald. But actually there's all these subtleties, and, you know, what actually could we, let's pick something, let's pick an apple, let's pick a daffodil, let's talk about what is the exact color for it. I'm all about connecting the verbal and visual. And I think that's a really good way of, again, like I said before, making words useful. Unless you can use these words to actually help you navigate the world, what's the point? A vocabulary is only as good as your ability to use it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. That's a really, really good point. Contextualizing vocabulary is equally important as learning it by rote, for sure. It's really about that deeper application and being able to master its appropriateness in terms of when and where you use it in your writing. I love the approach of using the visual images, and I think that will make a huge difference for many children. And I'm thinking particularly for EAL children, if it supports EAL children, it supports everyone. That's a fact. So the next question I have to ask you, you already touched on this earlier, is about the issue of controlled writing. You mentioned that children think that they're actually doing the right thing when they become very verbose and they use all these big, interesting words. And it starts to kind of go off on a tangent where every sentence is long and winding, and it gets a little bit ridiculous because the story has lost its tempo, it's lost its tension moments and its descriptive moments. They're all kind of mishmatching and merging into one. How do we as teachers develop any strategies for enabling our children to control their writing, so that they're not just giving us either several short sentences for no purpose or long winding sentences all the time because they're over describing?
I think there are lots of ways. For me, there's a moment in a child's development where they start to develop what psychologists call theory of mind, where they start to become aware of the minds of other people and not just this solipsistic thing of like pouring what's in their brain onto the paper. Many children think that what they said is what they meant and what they meant is what they said. And actually, it can be totally different for the person reading it. So what I will do is a lot of peer review type stuff where you've got kids reading each other's work and kids showing their work to a class, where they can actually see the experience for the reader of their work. So often, the experience of reading for a kid is just about looking inward. As we get older, we look outward, we become less introspective and we become more outward facing. How are other people perceiving us? Obviously, this has all sorts of negative implications for creativity, but it's also got some good ones. It's negative for creativity because being too concerned about what other people think becomes stifling. But there's a sweet spot in the middle where you can become aware of an audience, but also aware of your own experience and connecting the two things. So you've used all these long, fancy words. What image does it create for the reader? What is the picture we actually get? You've used these 4 similes in a row. A simile is all about painting a picture with words. What picture do we actually get? Are we actually, you've said like a bull in a china shop, and you've also said like a rampaging lion, and you've also said like snarling like it. What do you want us to actually imagine? Let's keep it clear. You've used this 5-syllable word. Is that actually clearer than using the 1-syllable word to actually get that idea across? And so I just think that what the children are experiencing, the reception of their work, rather than just receiving, a kind of ticks and crosses approach to marking, making storytelling an oral thing as well as a written thing, so they can hear it back and they can hear how it sounds, they can hear the rhythms of the writing. However you can take writing off the page, and however you can have children reflecting on how others receive it, I think that makes a big difference, because suddenly it's not a conceptual thing you explain to kids what word works best. They can hear it. They've heard stories. Suddenly their writing becomes a living, breathing thing. And a lot of those clunky choices become really obvious.
Obviously, a lot of our children, particularly in this post-pandemic era, have struggled in terms of reading widely, and in terms of having experiences of travel or, going to different cultural experiences. So we are ending up with children coming back into school with huge gaps in terms of their background knowledge. And certainly background knowledge has got a huge role to play when it comes to expanding a child's vocabulary, and also, having those rich conversations around those experiences. What strategies do you suggest that teachers can employ in order to help with the enrichment of background knowledge within their classrooms, and also recognizing that there are budget limitations as well?
It's a hard one because, you don't know what you don't know. And if a kid hasn't seen anything of the world, how do you give them the world in the space of a lesson? I think there are all sorts of ways that you can make a creative writing lesson immersive. Even whether it's, getting up on your phone some sort of atmospheric sounds of a particular environment. I've done an activity with my students where I will walk around the classroom playing, I don't know if you can hear this, sounds of the jungle.
Oh, yes. Brilliant.
And they've got their eyes closed, and I'm using a little water spritzer to spray mist around the room and create a humid environment. And we have little plastic toy spiders, or I've made these kind of vines, and we're creating the jungle in the classroom. And actually, so much of the writing isn't about putting pen to paper. It's about almost like a mindfulness thing of going, like, what are all the different sensations we're experiencing? Get them up out of their chairs, stamping on the spot, get them out of breath. Can you feel your heart beating? Are you starting to feel clammy? What are all the ways? Right, what's that word? Heart pounding like a drum. Let's get it on the board. You know, there's all sorts of ways that the classroom can be how they experience the world. And I do a lot of this online, so it's really not easy, but, you know, so much of writing quality does come from experience and maturity and exposure to the world, exposure to writing. And also, I mean, the whole point of writing, the whole point of reading is that you can experience the world on paper. So there's, you know, you can identify an aspect of life or the universe that your children are inexperienced in, find it in writing, or write about it yourself and use that as a prompt to get them understanding places, scenarios, relationships, whatever. So I do think there are ways about it, but it again, it comes down to bringing writing off the page for me.
There are certain challenges that teachers face, and this is often about building on innovation and resulting in a creative outcome. Now, this is particularly an issue for Key Stage 2, where children have got to demonstrate that creative flair. And there is always a struggle between showing them familiar genres of writing, getting them to play around with that in an innovative way, and to let it go and actually go off and apply that independently. They're always wanting to stick to what they have already seen modeled or shared, and not wanting to necessarily meander far away from that. How do we get our children to not just be innovative, but to be creative when it comes to writing outcomes?
I'm not convinced by this whole distinction between creativity and innovation, or at least if there is a distinction, it's semantic and not necessarily important at this stage. All creativity, all writing, art, music is derivative. To expect a child to magic new forms and ideas out of the air, I think, especially at Key Stage 2 level, is not only unfair, but unhelpful. Think about it like music. You wouldn't plonk a child down at a piano for the first time and say, be creative. What? What's that even mean? They don't have the tools. Building on what has come before them, standing on the shoulders of giants, is how we have all culture, all creativity, all innovation comes from something. It doesn't come out of nowhere. So expecting a child to be creative, like, I think originality is overrated, is what I'm saying. I think what's much more important is to think of writing at that level, like music, as a kind of mechanical or technical process through which you can add your own voice when you get to a certain level. So through learning the forms and structures and techniques of writing that have been modeled and magpied and scaffolded, whatever you want to call it, you can start to bring a child's personality into that and allow them to write about these things in their own way. I think there is a halfway house between writing from a model and coming up with something brand new. There are prompts you can use where a child can continue what's been modeled, so they're still going off in their own unique ways with it, but they've got a common starting point. So I think to focus on originality as a way of understanding creativity, I personally think is misplaced, but I understand there are boxes to tick. So I just think if you focus on a child's understanding of the forms and structures and then help them to put their personality, their humor, their worldview into it, you'll get the result of what you're looking for, creativity. To focus on original ideas is, I think, a bit of a fallacy.
According to the national curriculum, teachers need to be exposing children in an increasing way to etymology and morphology. And it's really about making sure that children understand the conventions of how words are built. I came across your videos on LinkyThinks on Facebook, and I thought that they were absolutely amazing, where you were looking at more or less word stories. Where do these words come from? And I thought that that was a phenomenal approach to making children victorious when it came to vocabulary. Can you give any kind of ideas and possibly any shine any light on any potential resources that teachers can use to develop their own subject knowledge around etymology and morphology?
Well, I think etymology and morphology are subjects that can either be really dry or really exciting. And I certainly didn't learn any of this at school. Might have helped if I'd learned Latin, but I didn't, wasn't given the option to. Might have helped if I, could learn Greek, but I've never had any formal education in any of this. It's all come about through being a bit of a word nerd and getting excited once I've realized how words are connected. I don't know of any really good resources. I'm working on some. So, necessity is the mother of invention and all that. Watch this space and hopefully I'll have something to offer you. But
amazing.
Short of Googling it, there isn't much. But if teachers are aware of how, just the fact that words have a history, words are living, breathing things, they evolve and they connect, and there's links to mythology and links to storytelling and links to politics and links to just historical events, then there's always kind of a little rabbit hole to go down. You take, even the word morphology is a great one. It sounds like a scary word. It just means the shape of things. Morph, like, yes. If something morphs or is amorphous, or all these different words that have morph in to do with shape. So morphology is just to do with the shape of words and how they, all the building blocks connect together. Etymology is more about the history of words, and that's where I get excited, learning that if you know that Pan was the god, the Greek god, half man, half goat, who caused panic in all of the other animals, then you'll know that, first of all, Pan means all. It's also where you get the word panic. It's also where you get stories like Peter Pan. He played the panpipes, and Pandora's box, which let out all of the world's evils. And then you've got, link it to modern day, like pandemic, which is a word that's become really important in the last few years. And also a panacea, which is something that heals all ills, or a panoply, a whole range of things, or a panorama, a view of everything. Panpsychic.
Pandemonium.
Pandemonium's a great one. Chaos and madness everywhere. There's so many, and then it connects to things like I heard a really good one recently, that the word sincere, it comes from when I think Roman sculptures carved out of marble, if the sculptor, and this is my bag because I've got a background in art, so I love this stuff, Roman sculptors, if there was a crack in the marble, they would hide it by filling it with wax. And whoever had commissioned the sculpture, whoever had bought it, wouldn't know that the marble was damaged. And over the years, the wax would erode away and they'd go, there's a big crack in it. So sincere literally means without wax. And so it comes from a meaning like, is this sincere? Is it without wax? Is it genuine? Is it, you're not hidden anything from me? Little things like that. Even words like biscuit. We know that bi, B-I means two, like bicycle or biannual or biennial or bilingual. All these words that have two in them, B-I. Biscuit means twice baked. That's where it comes from. So, I could go on about this all day. Now, you could say, well, if a teacher doesn't know this stuff, how do they find out? Well, just to inspire your own interest in learning, there's a really good book called The Etymologicon by Mark Forsyth. That's not a kid's book. It's just a great one to get you thinking about the connections of words. And he does a really great one about how Gen, comes from the Greek genos, which means birth. And not only is it where we get words like generation, people who are born at the same time, or gender, something you're assigned at birth, and therefore genitals, and also gentle and gentleman, someone who in the historic meaning meant well born. But you also get words like generous, because to be generous originally meant that you were born into a good family, but also words like oxygen, which gives birth to acid, and hydrogen, which means to give birth to water, which is H2O is where you get water. Anyway, that's a really good one for adults. You can see how I totally get lost down.
Yes.
There's also a website, I think, called Membean. Need to check that. That's got all these kind of root word things. But also, when you notice a little connection between words, just Google that word and the word etymology, and you can find out where they connect. And then make your own resources, like all teachers do. When there's a deficit of something good, make it.
And now a very quick chat.
Okay.
So can rich vocabulary be taught without the knowledge of etymology and morphology, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. But if it's presented in the right way, it makes it a lot more exciting, in my opinion.
And any quick ideas can you give for editing and improving writing when it comes to vocabulary?
Well, I bring you back to my word wheel books. There's the elementary version for ages 6 to 9, advanced version for 9 to 13. Really good thing you can do on a basic level is things like taking a blue highlighter and going through openers that could be improved, green highlighter for verbs, pink highlighter for adjectives, and give them, where they can go back and look at options. But in my opinion, the reason that kids are so rubbish at editing and checking their work is because they want to do well. And so they look for the good stuff. So you've got to do things that get them to flick a little switch in their brain to say, I'm not emotionally attached to this work anymore. This isn't my work. This is the work of a baddie or whatever. How can I now actively look for the mistakes to improve it? Because to so many kids, checking just means I've read it and move on. Yeah, I've checked it. No, it's an active process. How can you up level? And, people do all the purple polishing pens. There's so many different ways. But I think there's a psychological element to that. If you can crack it and get kids to actively want to find the mistakes, that's a really good way of changing the approach.
I like that idea, making them want to find the mistakes. Yes, I think I may have to think of a game for that the next time I'm in class. Thank you so much, Alexander Rosenburg from LinkyThinks. And well done once again on your received award for that amazing resource, the Descriptionary, and it is the humanoid edition.
That's right.
With all those amazing characters. We will place links for all of these resources in this video. And once again, thank you so much for being a guest on Pedagogy Power.
No, thank you very much for having me. See you soon.